The Bryant Estate ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, 250 guests draped in designer silk and practiced smiles. Champagne flutes caught the light like tiny stars scattered across white-clothed tables. Everyone who mattered in Northern California wine country society had made the drive from San Francisco. Tech moguls, real estate titans, old money families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings, the kind of people who measured worth in zeros and connections. When Madison Bryant walked through the arched entrance, conversations stuttered. Not because of her dress, elegant navy blue, understated in a room of peacocks, but because of the man beside her. He wore a gray suit that had seen better years. No cufflinks glinted at his wrists, no watch that cost more than a car payment. His shoes were polished, but worn at the heels. He looked like someone who'd wandered in from a coffee shop on the wrong side of town. Someone who'd missed the memo about what black tie optional actually meant in circles like these. Whispers rippled outward like stones dropped in still water. Eyes tracked their movement across the polished marble floor with the particular intensity of people who'd built their lives around knowing exactly where everyone belonged in the social hierarchy. And this man clearly didn't belong here. Madison's fingers tightened on his arm just slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the judgment pressing in from all sides. At the altar, Tyler Chambers stood beside his bride, Paige Bryant. The officiant droned through the ceremony's opening words, voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd performed this ritual 1,000 times. Tyler smiled at his future wife, radiant in her Vera Wang gown, but his gaze drifted over her shoulder, a habit born from years of watching rooms, reading crowds, looking for opportunities even in moments that should have been purely personal. His eyes landed on the man in the gray suit. Color drained from Tyler's face like water from a broken glass. His lips hovered an inch from Paige's, frozen in the moment before the kiss that would seal their union. But he wasn't looking at his bride anymore. He released her hands and stepped back from the altar. The ballroom held its breath. But that moment, the one where everything shattered, came 6 hours later, 4 weeks before the wedding. Garrett Wells sat in the corner booth of Oakwood Cafe, tucked between a vintage bookstore and an artisan bakery on Maple Street in Portland's quiet Burnside district. The cafe smelled like old paper and espresso, a combination that settled into your clothes and stayed there, becoming part of the fabric of your day, whether you wanted it to or not. Tuesday morning, 8:30. The place was nearly empty, except for a college student typing furiously near the window, fingers flying across the keyboard with the desperate energy of someone facing a deadline, and an older man working through the crossword puzzle by the register, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Garrett came here every Tuesday and Thursday morning after dropping his daughter at school during the weeks she stayed with him. The routine had become sacred over the past year, not because the coffee was exceptional or the atmosphere particularly welcoming, but because nobody here knew who he was. Nobody asked questions. Nobody wanted anything. He had a paperback open in front of him, something about Cold War espionage, but the words blurred together on the page. Mostly, he just sat, existed, let the world move around him without demanding he participate. The book was a prop, really, a signal that he preferred solitude, that the empty seat across from him should stay empty. 12 years ago, Garrett had been someone else entirely. 12 years ago, his name had appeared in Forbes. Business schools taught case studies about his decisions. Entrepreneurs pitched him in elevators, at charity galas, at his daughter's preschool pickup. His phone had never stopped ringing. His calendar had never had empty spaces. His life had never been his own. Garrett Wells III, founder and CEO of Wells Capital, the venture capitalist with the Midas touch, The man who could turn a garage startup into a billion-dollar empire with a single phone call and a signed term sheet. Then his marriage had fallen apart. Not dramatically, not with infidelity or scandal, but slowly, like a building settling on a cracked foundation, until one day you realized the whole structure was unsalvageable. Jessica had loved what his success could buy: the house in Atherton, the invitations to exclusive events, the social currency that came with being Mrs. Garrett Wells III. But she'd stopped loving him somewhere along the way, if she ever really had. When their daughter Harper was 2 years old, Garrett had discovered Jessica had committed $50 million of their fund to a startup he'd explicitly rejected, not because the business model was sound, but because the founder was married to one of her closest friends. The company had collapsed 6 months later, taking their money and a significant chunk of Wells Capital's reputation with it. He'd confronted her. She told him he was being selfish, that he owed it to Harper to give her the world. But when Garrett looked at his 2-year-old daughter, all he saw was a future where she'd be valued for her last name instead of who she was as a person. So he'd filed for divorce, walked away from Wells Capital, changed his name legally from Garrett Wells III to just Garrett Wells, dropped the suffix that connected him to his grandfather's legacy, to the weight of expectations that came with being third-generation money. He'd started investing under the pseudonym J. Parker, using his mother's maiden name, so he could keep doing what he was good at without being a public figure. Jessica had gotten the San Francisco house, the social circle, everything she wanted. Garrett had gotten primary custody of Harper and anonymity. Harper stayed with her mother every other week because Garrett wouldn't take his daughter away from her mother, even if they had vastly different values about what mattered in life. Jessica had remarried within 2 years, another venture capitalist, even wealthier than Garrett had been. Harper went to private school, had everything money could buy. And Garrett lived here, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, trying to give his daughter at least one parent who valued her for more than her potential to enhance their social status. The barista, a woman in her mid-20s with purple-streaked hair and an eyebrow piercing, approached his booth with a coffee pot. "Refill, gray suit guy?" Garrett nodded. She'd been calling him that for months. He'd never corrected her with his actual name, and she'd never asked for it. It was perfect. "Quiet morning," she observed, topping off his cup. "Best kind," Garrett replied. She grinned and moved on to bother the crossword enthusiast. Garrett returned his attention to his book, to the comfortable anonymity of being nobody in particular, and tried not to think about how empty the seat across from him looked. The cafe door opened, bell chiming soft against the hiss of the espresso machine. A woman walked in, 40-something, maybe late 30s, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, jeans that looked expensive but weren't ostentatious about it, a loose gray sweater that had seen enough wear to be a favorite rather than a fashion statement. No makeup that Garrett could detect. No jewelry except a simple watch, functional, not luxury brand. She looked tired. Not the kind of exhaustion that came from a bad night's sleep, but the kind that came from carrying weight nobody else could see, from fighting battles that left no visible scars. She ordered black coffee at the counter, no milk, no sugar, no complicated modifications, and then, without asking permission or making eye contact, sat at the table directly across from his booth. Garrett glanced up briefly. Their eyes met for half a second, a mutual acknowledgement that meant nothing and everything. Two people who understood that sometimes you needed to be alone in the presence of another human being, that solitude and isolation weren't the same thing. Then he went back to his book, and she stared out the window at the gray Portland morning, and neither of them said a word. That was how it started. No introduction, no conversation, just two people occupying the same quiet space because the world outside was too loud and demanding. And this corner of Oakwood Cafe offered something increasingly rare: the permission to simply exist without performance. She came back the following Tuesday. Same table, same black coffee, same tired eyes. This time she brought a laptop and worked in silence, fingers moving across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone who'd answered the same emails 1,000 times before. Garrett didn't ask what she did. She didn't ask what he was reading. The unspoken agreement held. By the third week, Garrett found himself arriving a few minutes earlier than usual. He wouldn't have admitted why, even to himself, but the truth was there in the slight disappointment he felt on the days she didn't show up, in the way his posture relaxed when she did. The woman, still nameless, still a stranger, had become part of the landscape, a fixture as reliable as the burnt smell from the bakery next door, or the way sunlight never quite reached his corner booth, no matter the time of day. Thursday of week 3, she forgot her laptop charger. Her computer died halfway through whatever she was working on. She sighed, the sound carrying more weight than a simple technical frustration should, and closed the laptop with the careful precision of someone exercising tremendous restraint. She leaned back in her chair with the posture of someone who'd just lost a battle they fought every single day. Garrett kept his eyes on his book, but he could feel her restlessness bleeding across the narrow space between their tables, could sense the shift in the air, the way her presence changed from peaceful to agitated in the span of a few breaths. Her voice cut through the silence, quiet but deliberate. "Do you ever feel like the world is too loud?" She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on her empty coffee cup, turning it slowly between her hands, watching the dregs of liquid swirl at the bottom. Garrett set his book down, carefully marking his page even though he hadn't absorbed a single word in the past 20 minutes. "Every day." She smiled, barely, a crack in the careful facade she'd been maintaining since the first time she'd walked through that door. "Good. I thought it was just me." That was the first real thing they said to each other. Her name was Madison. She didn't offer a last name, and Garrett didn't provide his. She told him she worked in real estate, vague enough to mean anything, specific enough to feel like truth. He said he did consulting in the financial sector, which was technically accurate if you counted anonymous venture capital investments as consulting. They talked about books she'd read years ago but remembered fondly, about the way Portland rain felt different than rain anywhere else, heavier somehow, more present, about the small frustrations of modern life, automated phone systems that trapped you in loops, traffic that made no sense, coffee that cost too much and tasted like cardboard. Nothing important. Nothing that required honesty beyond the surface. And it felt like the first genuine conversation Garrett had experienced in 12 years. After that, the pattern solidified. Tuesdays and Thursdays, same corner of Oakwood Cafe, same rhythm of comfortable silence, punctuated by occasional words. Madison never wore anything expensive, never mentioned money or business beyond the vague real estate label. Garrett never mentioned his daughter, his past, the life he'd left behind in Silicon Valley. They existed in a bubble, protected from context. And for the first time since his divorce, Garrett felt something like peace. One Thursday in the 4th week, Madison showed up looking worse than usual. She dropped into her chair like gravity had doubled overnight, rubbed her face with both hands, the gesture carrying the weight of someone who'd reached the absolute end of their rope. She ordered 2 shots of espresso instead of her usual black coffee, and the barista raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Garrett waited. That was their way, offering space, not demanding explanations. If she wanted to talk, she'd talk. If she didn't, the silence would hold them both. But she kept talking anyway. My family thinks I don't have a life. Madison's voice was flat, exhausted. They're right, but the second I try to do something for myself, they have opinions about it. Garrett closed his book completely, giving her his full attention. What kind of opinions? The kind that come with conditions. She looked at him directly for the first time all morning, searching for something he couldn't name. Do you have family like that? The question hit deeper than she probably intended. Garrett thought about Jessica, about the expectations that had crushed their marriage, about the way Harper's private school mothers looked at him when he showed up in jeans instead of designer casual, about his own parents, long gone, who'd built the Wells name into something that felt more like a prison than a legacy. I don't have much family left, he said carefully. But I remember what it's like to be controlled by people who think they know better. Madison nodded slowly, processing this. I wish I could just disappear sometimes. Just being nobody. Garrett understood that more than she could possibly know. For 12 years, he'd been exactly nobody. He'd walked away from a name that opened doors and closed others, from a reputation that preceded him into every room, from expectations that suffocated more than they elevated. He'd become a ghost in his own industry, operating through intermediaries and legal structures so complex that even people who owed him everything had never seen his face. He'd built a life around invisibility, and sitting across from this exhausted woman who wanted the same thing, he felt something shift inside his chest. Not attraction, at least not primarily. More like recognition. She was running from the same thing he'd been running from, just coming at it from a different angle. Sometimes disappearing is the only way to find out who you really are, Garrett said quietly. Madison's eyes met his, and for a moment, the cafe and the other customers and the whole damn world fell away. It was just the two of them. Two people who understood what it meant to be suffocated by other people's expectations, by the weight of names and legacies, and the assumption that your worth could be measured in zeros and social connections. Is that what you did? She asked. Disappeared? In a way. Did it work? Garrett looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that for the first time in over a decade, he was having a conversation with someone who saw him as just Garrett. Not Garrett Wells III, not the founder of Wells Capital, not the man who could make or break a startup with a single investment decision. Just Garrett. I'm still figuring that out, he admitted. They kept meeting. The weeks blurred together in the best possible way. Madison started smiling more, genuine expressions that reached her eyes and transformed her whole face. She laughed at his dry observations about the other cafe regulars, at the way the barista always spelled names wrong on purpose, just to see if anyone would correct her. Nobody ever did. Garrett found himself looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays in a way he hadn't looked forward to anything since Harper was small enough to ride on his shoulders, before she'd become a teenager with her own complex inner world that sometimes felt impenetrable even to him. Madison made him feel normal, not wealthy, not powerful, not burdened by the weight of decisions that affected hundreds of people he'd never meet. Just normal. Just a guy who liked books and bad coffee and quiet mornings in corner booths. She made him feel seen without knowing anything real about him, which should have been a warning. Friday evening, Garrett sat in his modest apartment, 2 bedrooms, decent light, furniture from estate sales and secondhand stores, because buying new felt wasteful when perfectly good things already existed. His daughter sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, but attention focused on him with the laser precision only teenagers could manage. Harper was 14, going on 40. Observant in ways that unnerved him sometimes. She had her mother's eyes, the same deep brown that could see straight through bullshit, but his tendency toward brutal honesty. She set her phone down with the deliberate care of someone preparing to say something important. "You sound different lately." Garrett looked up from the dinner he was preparing. Stir-fry. Simple. Using vegetables from the farmer's market because Harper had recently decided she cared about sustainable agriculture. And Garrett was trying to support that, even if it meant his grocery bill had doubled. Different how? Happy different. She tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she was determined to solve. "You met someone." Garrett kept his hands busy, chopping bell peppers into uniform strips with the knife skills he'd learned from a YouTube video years ago. "Just a friend. Someone who doesn't know anything about before." "Good." Harper pulled her knees up to her chest, settling into the couch cushions. "You deserve that, Dad." But her expression shifted, something darker creeping in around the edges of her smile. Something that looked uncomfortably like worry. "What happens when she finds out?" Garrett's knife paused mid-cut. "She won't. That's the point." "Dad." Harper's voice carried that particular tone she used when she thought he was being deliberately obtuse, when she was about to explain something obvious that he was willfully ignoring. "If you really like her, she needs to know who you are." "She knows who I am. The me that matters." His daughter gave him a look that made him feel like the child in the room. "Does she? Or does she just know the version you're showing her?" The question sat between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Garrett wanted to argue, to explain that there was no real difference between Garrett the cafe regular and Garrett the anonymous investor who'd reshaped Silicon Valley from the shadows. But Harper had met enough of her mother's society friends to know exactly how people changed when they learned about money. She didn't want him hurt. But she also knew secrets had consequences. They ate dinner in relative silence after that, talking about her homework and the drama with her friend group and whether she should try out for the soccer team. Normal things, safe things, but the question lingered in the air between them, unspoken but present. What happens when she finds out? Thursday of week 5, Madison didn't show up. Garrett waited an hour, telling himself it didn't matter. People had lives. Meetings ran long. Unexpected emergencies happened. Maybe she'd simply decided not to come, had found something better to do with her Tuesday and Thursday mornings than sit in a cafe with a man she barely knew. But the cafe felt different without her. The silence pressed down instead of offering relief. The empty table across from him felt accusatory, like it was judging him for caring about the absence of someone who was, technically, still a stranger. The following Tuesday, she still didn't appear. Garrett sat in his usual booth, book unopened on the table, coffee growing cold in its cup. He'd spent years perfecting the art of not needing people, of finding contentment in solitude. One woman's absence shouldn't have rattled him. Yet here he was, rattled. Thursday, she finally walked in, but she looked different. Polished instead of tired. Her hair was styled, not elaborately, but intentionally. She wore a blazer over dark jeans, minimal makeup that somehow made her look more like herself and less at the same time, like she'd put on armor that was subtle enough to be mistaken for casual confidence. She looked like someone important, which she'd never looked before. She sat across from him and set a cream-colored envelope on the table between them. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind of thing that cost more than it should simply because it could. The kind of invitation that announced its own significance through weight and texture alone. Her voice came out steady, but her hands trembled slightly as they rested on either side of the envelope. "I need to ask you something. You can say no. I'll understand if you do." Garrett looked at the envelope, then at her. "What is it?" "My sister's getting married. 2 weeks from now. Big event. My whole family will be there." She paused, gathering something, courage maybe, or just the will to say the next part out loud. "I don't want to go alone." The request landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples outward that Garrett could already see spreading into his carefully constructed life. He'd been to events like that before. In another life, when his calendar was full of galas and fundraisers and networking dinners where everyone smiled too much and meant too little. He knew exactly what kind of scrutiny came with walking into a room full of wealthy strangers as someone's +1. He knew what they'd see when they looked at him, at his second-hand suit and his lack of obvious markers of success. "You want me to come with you?" "I know it's a lot to ask." Madison's words came faster now, like she needed to get them out before losing her nerve. "I know we don't really know each other that well, but I feel like I can breathe when I'm around you. I don't feel that way around anyone else, especially not at events like this." Garrett picked up the envelope, felt the weight of it speak volumes about the world he'd be walking into. Embossed printing, probably hand-delivered. The kind of invitation that wasn't really an invitation so much as a summons. "What kind of event are we talking about?" Madison looked down at her hands, at the way her fingers twisted together in her lap. "The kind where people judge you based on your last name and your net worth. The kind where I have to smile and pretend I'm not being suffocated." Every instinct Garrett had developed over 12 years of careful invisibility screamed at him to decline, to make an excuse, to protect the bubble they'd created here in this cafe where nobody knew anything about anything that mattered. But he looked at her, really looked, and saw the same desperation he'd felt a dozen years ago when the walls had closed in and the only solution had been to disappear. "Why me?" "Because you don't care about any of that." Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "Because you see me. Not the version of me everyone else expects. Just me." Garrett thought about his daughter, about the quiet life he'd built, about the fact that he'd spent years avoiding rooms full of people who thought they were better than him based on nothing but inherited wealth and cultivated connections. But he also thought about Madison, about the way she'd walked into this cafe looking for the same thing he'd been looking for, a place where she could just be. The decision was probably a mistake. He knew that even as he made it. "Okay, I'll go with you." Her expression shifted through relief and gratitude and something else he couldn't quite identify. Fear, maybe. Or recognition that they'd just changed something fundamental between them, had stepped out of the safe bubble of anonymity into something far more complicated. "You don't have to dress up or anything," she said quickly. "Just be yourself. That's all I need." Garrett nodded, but even as he agreed, he felt the weight of what he was walking into. He'd been to events like this before. He knew exactly how people like Madison's family would look at someone like him, someone in an off-the-rack suit, no pedigree, no obvious wealth to justify his presence. He knew, and he went anyway. The next week passed in a strange suspension, like time had decided to move at a different speed than usual. Madison texted him for the first time, a simple message thanking him for agreeing to come, acknowledging it would be uncomfortable, but expressing relief that he'd be there. Garrett stared at the message for a long time before replying. The distance between them was starting to close in ways that made the eventual collision feel inevitable. 3 days before the wedding, Madison showed him another message during their Thursday cafe meeting. This one was from her sister Paige. The text was polite, carefully worded. But underneath the politeness lived something sharp, something that cut. Looking forward to meeting your guest. Took the liberty of sending over a few wardrobe suggestions just so he feels comfortable. You know how formal these things can be. Attached were links to designer suits, Armani, Tom Ford, Brioni. Each one cost more than Garrett's monthly rent. Madison's jaw tightened as she handed him her phone, the muscles working beneath her skin in a way that suggested she was exercising tremendous control to keep from throwing the device across the cafe. Her voice came out flat, drained of inflection. She's testing you. She's testing both of us. Garrett looked at the links, at the casual cruelty of suggesting he needed to be dressed differently to be acceptable, at the assumption that he couldn't afford these things himself, or that if he could, he'd somehow failed by choosing not to buy them. He handed the phone back. I'll wear what I always wear. If that's a problem for her, she can take it up with you. Something flickered across Madison's face, gratitude mixed with apprehension, relief tangled with worry. They're going to judge you. I know. They're going to make you feel like you don't belong. I know that too. She studied him for a long moment, this woman he barely knew, but somehow understood on a level that defied the brevity of their acquaintance. Then why are you still coming? Garrett thought about it. Really thought about it. About the cafe, about the way Madison's shoulders relaxed when she sat across from him, about the fact that she'd trusted him with something real in a world that seemed to trade only in performance and pretense. Because you asked, he said simply, and because I know what it's like to be controlled by people who think they know better. The answer seemed to satisfy something in her, though the worry didn't fully leave her eyes. It probably wouldn't, he realized, until this whole thing was over. Maybe not even then. That night, Garrett called Harper. She was at her mother's place in San Francisco, the house he used to live in back when his life had been completely different. The custody arrangement gave him alternating weeks, which meant constant transitions, but it also meant Harper got to experience both worlds, the quiet Portland life he'd built and the society circles her mother still moved through. His daughter picked up on the second ring. Hey, Dad. Hey, sweetheart. How's your week going? They talked about school, about her friends, about the drama that seemed to consume teenage lives with an intensity that felt both trivial and desperately important. Garrett listened, asked questions, tried to be present even though his mind kept drifting back to the wedding invitation sitting on his kitchen counter. Then Harper's tone shifted, became more focused. So, who is she? Garrett should have known better than to think he could hide anything from his daughter. What makes you think there's a she? Dad, come on. Harper's voice carried affectionate exasperation. You've been different, lighter. I can hear it even over the phone. He found himself smiling, despite the complexity of the situation. I met someone at the cafe I go to. She invited me to a family wedding. Dad, that's great! The enthusiasm in Harper's voice was genuine, which made what came next harder. Why do you sound worried? Her family is wealthy, traditional. I'm not sure they'll approve of someone like me. Harper laughed, the sound sharp with irony. Someone like you? Dad, you're literally— She doesn't know about that, Garrett interrupted, and I want to keep it that way. Silence on the other end of the line, heavy with things unsaid. Then, carefully. But Dad, if you really like her, she needs to know who you are. She knows who I am, the me that matters. Does she? Harper's voice softened, but the question cut deep. Or does she just know the version you're showing her? It was the same question she'd asked before, but it hit differently now. Now there was a wedding invitation. Now there were designer suit links. Now there were only 2 days left to change his mind. I've seen how people change when they find out about money, Harper. Your mother's friends, the families at your school, they look at you differently. They want different things. Mom wasn't like that at first, though, was she? The observation stung because it was accurate. Jessica had fallen in love with Garrett Wells, the grad student, the guy with big ideas and bigger ambition, but a bank account that could barely cover rent. It was only later, after success came and the money followed, that she'd fallen in love with the lifestyle instead of the person. No, Garrett admitted. She wasn't. So maybe this woman won't be either. Maybe she'll be different. Garrett wanted to believe that, wanted it more than he'd wanted anything in years. But 12 years of careful isolation had taught him that wanting something didn't make it true. They talked a while longer before saying goodnight. After hanging up, Garrett sat in his small apartment and looked at the gray suit hanging in his closet. Clean, well-fitted, unremarkable. The suit of someone who didn't matter, which was exactly what he'd wanted to be for 12 years. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. Garrett put on the gray suit, looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, and saw exactly what Madison's family would see. A man who didn't belong in their world. A man who'd wandered into the wrong event, who'd somehow convinced their daughter to bring him despite his obvious unsuitability. But he'd promised. And unlike many things in his life, his word still meant something. Madison picked him up in a car that cost more than his annual rent, sleek black Mercedes S-Class with a driver in a crisp uniform who opened the door for them without making eye contact. The first real display of wealth, and it made the gulf between their worlds suddenly, painfully visible. She looked beautiful. Her dress was elegant navy blue, simple lines that probably cost more than they appeared to, the kind of understated luxury that only people with real money understood. Her hair was styled in soft waves, makeup understated but professional, applied with the kind of skill that suggested either expensive help or years of practice. She looked like someone important, which she'd carefully avoided looking like at the cafe. She smiled when she saw him, but tension lived behind her eyes. "You look great." Garrett climbed into the car, settling into leather seats that probably cost more than his entire furniture collection. The new car smell was overwhelming, artificial. "You look nervous." "I am." They didn't talk much during the drive. The landscape shifted from Portland's urban density to rural highways lined with pine trees, then to the kind of private estate that required an invitation just to find. The kind of place that didn't appear on GPS, that existed in a world parallel to the one most people inhabited. Bryant Estate sat at the end of a tree-lined drive, all stone and glass and careful architecture that whispered old money without shouting it. The kind of place that had been designed to impress without seeming to try, which was perhaps the most impressive thing of all. Garrett had been in places like this before, had owned a place not dissimilar back when his name appeared on Forbes lists and industry publications. He knew the language of wealth, the performance of it, the subtle signals that separated old money from new money from no money at all. He just hadn't spoken it in a very long time. As they approached the entrance, Madison took his hand. Her grip was tight, almost desperate, fingers interlacing with his in a way that suggested she was holding on for dear life. "Whatever happens today," she said quietly, "I'm glad you're here." Garrett looked at her, at this woman who'd found him in a cafe and decided he was worth knowing without knowing anything real about him, and felt the weight of the deception settling into his bones like cold water. Me too. But the thought that followed, unbidden and unwelcome. She won't be glad in a few hours. The valet took the car keys with practiced efficiency. Garrett and Madison walked through the entrance into a world of marble fountains and designer gowns and practiced smiles that meant everything and nothing. Every head turned. Conversations stuttered mid-sentence. Eyes tracked their movement with the subtle aggression of people accustomed to judging worth at a glance, to making instantaneous calculations about who mattered and who didn't. A man in a suit that cost $5,000 looked Garrett up and down, expression carefully neutral, but message crystal clear. You don't belong here. A woman in pearls and Chanel whispered to her companion, hand partially covering her mouth, but not enough to hide the smirk. Garrett couldn't hear the words, but he could imagine them easily enough, could fill in the blanks based on a dozen similar events he'd attended years ago, back when he'd been on the other side of the judgment. Madison's fingers tightened on Garrett's arm. Ignore them. I am. But he wasn't. He saw every look, felt every judgment, cataloged every moment of casual cruelty that wealthy people inflicted without even realizing they were doing it. Because to them, this wasn't cruelty. This was simply order, the natural hierarchy of the world, and he was disrupting it by existing in their space without the proper credentials, without the visible markers of success that would justify his presence. They found seats near the front. Third row, which Madison's mother had apparently deemed appropriate for her eldest daughter and the unsuitable date she'd brought. Not front row, where family belonged, but close enough to maintain appearances, close enough that everyone could see them, could continue their assessments and whispered judgments. Eleanor Bryant sat in the first row, silver hair perfectly coiffed, posture rigid with the kind of control that came from decades of social performance. She glanced back once, eyes sweeping over Garrett with the efficiency of someone conducting an audit. Her expression remained neutral, but Garrett had spent enough years in boardrooms to recognize assessment when he saw it. He'd been weighed and found wanting before they'd even spoken a single word. The ceremony began. 250 guests settled into manufactured reverence, the kind of quiet that descended over crowds at weddings and funerals, events where social convention demanded a performance of solemnity, regardless of actual feeling. The officiant spoke about love and commitment in words that had been spoken at 1,000 weddings and would be spoken at 1,000 more. Generic enough to apply to anyone, specific enough to sound personal if you weren't listening too closely. Paige Bryant walked down the aisle in her elaborate gown, looking like every bride looked, beautiful and terrified and certain all at once. The dress was Vera Wang, obviously, probably cost more than Garrett's car. The train stretched behind her like a river of white silk, held by two small flower girls who took their job with the utmost seriousness. Tyler Chambers waited at the altar in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his expression carefully composed. He looked successful, which he was, looked confident, which he'd earned, looked happy, which Garrett hoped was genuine and not just another performance in a day full of them. Garrett had never seen Tyler Chambers' face before today. They'd communicated exclusively through lawyers and intermediaries for 3 years. That had been the agreement. Complete anonymity in exchange for the capital that saved Chambers Biosystems from bankruptcy. $18 million transferred through a maze of LLCs and offshore accounts, all leading back to the pseudonym J. Parker. The investment had paid off spectacularly. Chambers Biosystems had developed 3 promising gene therapies, caught the attention of a pharmaceutical giant, and sold for $950 million. The sale had made Tyler Chambers wealthy enough to marry into the Bryant family without being seen as a fortune hunter, had given him the kind of success story that opened doors in circles like these. And Tyler had never known who to thank. The legal structure Garrett had built was specifically designed to prevent exactly that kind of knowledge, to maintain the wall between J. Parker the investor and Garrett Wells the person. Until now. The officiant droned through the standard text. Paige and Tyler exchanged vows they'd probably written themselves, but sounded suspiciously like every other wedding vow Garrett had ever heard. The moment approached when the groom would kiss the bride and 250 people would applaud and pretend they believed in forever. Tyler turned toward Paige, lifting the veil from her face with hands that trembled just slightly, but his eyes drifted over her shoulder, scanning the crowd in that restless way successful people had, always watching, always cataloging, always looking for the next opportunity, even in moments that should have been purely personal. His gaze landed on Garrett. For a moment, nothing happened. Tyler's expression stayed carefully neutral, smile still in place, body language still appropriate for a man about to kiss his bride. But something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition firing like a spark in dry tinder. Memory connecting dots that shouldn't have been connectable. Not here. Not now. Not at his own wedding. The color drained from his face like someone had opened a valve. His lips hovered an inch from Paige's, frozen in the instant before contact. But he wasn't looking at his bride anymore. He was staring past her, past the officiant, past the front row of family, into the third row where Garrett sat perfectly still. Paige noticed first. Tyler? But her fiancé didn't respond. He just stood there, staring, as understanding dawned across his features in real time. Then Tyler Chambers released Paige's hands and stepped back from the altar. The officiant cleared his throat, uncertain. You may now... But Tyler was already walking down the steps, past the front row where Eleanor Bryant sat frozen in shock, past the bridesmaids who exchanged nervous glances, their carefully practiced smiles faltering. He walked directly toward Garrett with the single-minded focus of someone who'd just seen a ghost. The ballroom went silent. 250 people held their breath. Phones appeared in hands, inevitable as sunrise, predictable as gravity. Madison's hand tightened on Garrett's arm, confusion radiating from her in waves. What's happening? Garrett didn't answer, couldn't answer, because he knew exactly what was about to happen, and there was no way to stop it, no words that could prevent the collision he'd been dreading since the moment he'd agreed to come to this wedding. Tyler stopped in front of their row. He looked at Garrett Wells sitting in his off-the-rack gray suit, this man who'd been judged and dismissed by everyone in the room, and Tyler Chambers dropped to one knee. The word came out quiet but clear, cutting through the silence like a blade. Sir? Madison stared at Tyler, then at Garrett, trying to understand what was happening. Around them, phones appeared in more hands. Guests leaned forward in their seats. The moment crystallized into something that would be remembered, discussed, dissected, for years to come in the circles these people traveled. Tyler's voice shook slightly, but the words came out clear enough for the front rows to hear. 3 years ago, you saved my company. The whispers started immediately, rolling through the ballroom like thunder in the distance, growing louder as they spread. When every investor had walked away, Tyler continued, his eyes locked on Garrett's face with an intensity that bordered on worship. When I was 90 days from bankruptcy, when the banks wouldn't touch me, you believed in me. Garrett sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable, even as his carefully constructed world collapsed around him like a building in slow motion. Every beam supporting his anonymity cracking, every wall he'd built over 12 years crumbling to dust. You gave me $18 million when no one else would risk a dime. The whispers grew louder. Guests turned to each other, phones already pulled out, already recording, already capturing this moment for posterity and social media and whatever currency viral moments held in their world. Tyler's voice carried more confidence now, addressing not just Garrett, but the entire room. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be standing here today. I wouldn't have any of this. Chambers Biosystems, this wedding, this life. His voice cracked with emotion. I owe you everything. Someone in the back said the name first, tentative, questioning. J. Parker? Then others picked it up, passed it forward like a relay race, the name gaining momentum until it became a wave crashing over the careful order of the ceremony. That's J. Parker? The J. Parker? Oh my God, it's really him? Tyler straightened but didn't stand, still on one knee in a posture of supplication that made Garrett profoundly uncomfortable. Tyler addressed the room now instead of just Garrett, his voice carrying the weight of genuine emotion, gratitude so deep it bordered on religious fervor. This man is J. Parker. Some of you have heard the name. Most of you have spent years trying to find him. Tyler's voice grew stronger, more assured. He's the investor who's funded half the successful startups in San Francisco. The one who turned no-name founders into billionaires. The one who built empires from nothing and never asked for credit or recognition or even a meeting. The ballroom erupted. People stood from their seats, phones recorded from every angle. Eleanor Bryant's hand flew to her mouth, her carefully maintained composure shattering. Paige remained frozen at the altar, bouquet hanging limp in her hands, her wedding dress suddenly seeming irrelevant to the drama unfolding in the third row. Madison turned to Garrett, her face pale, blood draining from her cheeks in a way that reminded him of Tyler's reaction minutes earlier. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but Garrett heard every syllable. J. Parker? Garrett finally moved, standing slowly. His hand slipped from Madison's grip as she pulled away, an instinctive recoil from something she didn't understand, from a person who'd suddenly become a stranger. He looked at Tyler with something close to exhaustion. This wasn't supposed to happen. Tyler shook his head, finally standing, his expensive tuxedo somehow looking rumpled despite being perfectly tailored. I know you don't want attention. I know you built your entire life around staying anonymous. His voice took on a pleading quality, but I couldn't let you sit here and be treated like you don't matter. Not after everything you've done. Not when I watched them look at you like you were nobody, when you're the reason I'm anybody at all. Garrett's jaw tightened. He glanced at Madison, saw her staring at him like he was a stranger, like he'd transformed into someone else in the space of 30 seconds, which, in her eyes, he had. We should go, Garrett said quietly. But before he could move, Eleanor Bryant was there. Eleanor Bryant had crossed the ballroom in seconds, heels clicking against marble with purpose and precision. She reached for Garrett's hand, her expression transformed into something warm and desperate, a complete 180 from the cold assessment she'd given him less than an hour ago. Mr. Parker, she breathed, and Garrett heard the difference in her voice immediately. No longer the barely concealed disdain of someone addressing her daughter's unsuitable date. Now it was the tone of someone who'd just discovered they'd insulted royalty. I had no idea. If I'd known, if any of us had known. Garrett pulled his hand back before she could grasp it. You didn't need to know. But we do now. Eleanor's smile was too wide, too eager, her eyes already calculating. And we're so honored to have you here. Please, you must stay for the reception. There are so many people here who would benefit from meeting you. So many opportunities for— No. Eleanor blinked, momentarily thrown by the simple refusal. She wasn't accustomed to being told no, Garrett realized, especially not in her own home, at her daughter's wedding, when she was offering what she clearly considered a tremendous privilege. "I'm sorry?" I said no. Garrett's voice stayed calm, but steel lived underneath the words. "I'm not staying, and I'm not interested in being introduced to anyone." He turned to Madison. She was still staring at him, her face a mixture of shock and hurt, and something that looked uncomfortably like betrayal. "We need to talk," Garrett said. Madison didn't move. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "You're Jay Parker?" "Yes." "The Jay Parker?" Her voice gained strength, though it trembled at the edges. "The one everyone's been trying to find for years? The phantom investor who's worth, what, $1 billion? I don't know, exactly. It was true. Garrett had stopped calculating his net worth years ago. It changed too much based on market fluctuations, on which companies succeeded and which failed. Around 800 million, probably, give or take. Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" Garrett looked around the ballroom. Everyone was watching, listening, recording. He could feel the weight of their attention pressing down like a physical force, like the air itself had become heavier. Not here. But Madison wasn't done. Her shock was transforming into something sharper, more painful. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" "I wasn't keeping it from you." Garrett gestured at the room, at the people already pulling out business cards, at Eleanor still hovering with that desperate smile, at the phones recording every word. "I was keeping it from this. This is why I left that world. This is why I don't tell people who I am." Madison's eyes glistened with tears she was clearly fighting to hold back. "But I'm not them." The words hung between them, an accusation and a plea and a question all at once. "I'm not—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought we were honest with each other." Something cracked inside Garrett's chest, a fissure opening in the careful armor he'd built around his heart over 12 years of isolation. "We were," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were insufficient. "No." Madison's voice shook. "We weren't. I told you everything about my family, about how suffocating my life is, about how I can't trust anyone because everyone wants something from me. Everyone sees the Bryant name and the money, and they stop seeing me." Her voice grew stronger, anger mixing with hurt. "And you just sat there and let me talk. You let me pour my heart out about not being able to trust people because of my wealth. And the whole time, you were richer than my entire family combined. You let me think you were different, that you understood what it was like to be normal, to want simplicity." "I do understand. Do you?" Madison's voice rose slightly, drawing even more attention from the surrounding guests. "Because right now, you feel like everyone else. Just another person with secrets. Just another man who lied to me." Paige was suddenly there, wedding dress rustling as she moved between them with the particular fury of someone whose moment had been completely hijacked. She looked between Madison and Garrett, her expression tight with the particular anger of a bride whose wedding ceremony had been interrupted for someone else's drama. "Can we not do this right now?" Paige's voice carried across the ballroom, sharp enough to cut. "This is my wedding." Madison turned on her sister with a vehemence that clearly surprised both of them. "Your wedding? Your wedding?" "Madison, where you and Mother spent the last 2 weeks making sure I knew Garrett wasn't good enough?" Madison's voice broke. "Where you sent me links to $1,000 suits because you were embarrassed by him? Where you made it crystal clear that my choice of date wasn't up to your standards?" Paige's face flushed red. I was trying to help. You were trying to control me. Madison's voice carried years of accumulated frustration. Like you always do. Like Mother always does. Like this entire family has done my whole life. Deciding what's appropriate and what isn't. Who's acceptable and who needs to be fixed or hidden or apologized for. Her voice cracked, and she looked at Garrett with something raw in her eyes. And I let you. I let you make me feel like I'd done something wrong by bringing someone I actually cared about. Because I thought... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. I thought at least one person in my life wasn't lying to me. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Garrett felt it hit, felt the truth of it settle into his bones, because she was right. He'd done exactly what he'd accused Jessica of doing all those years ago. He'd made decisions about what information someone else could handle, had hidden parts of himself because it was easier than risking rejection. I never lied, Garrett said, but even he could hear how weak it sounded. You didn't tell the truth either. Madison's voice was quiet now, drained of the anger, leaving only hurt behind. And I don't know which is worse. The ballroom was still watching, still listening. Garrett could see phones recording, could see people leaning in to catch every word. He'd spent 12 years avoiding exactly this moment, the exposure, the spectacle, the transformation from person to commodity. And now it was happening anyway, in front of 250 people who had spread this story through their networks like wildfire. He took a breath, trying to find words that might make this better, knowing there probably weren't any. You're right, he said quietly. I should have told you. But I didn't know how to do it without this happening. He gestured at the crowd, at the phones, at the transformation that was already occurring in how people looked at him. Without becoming a transaction. Without having every conversation become about what I could do for someone instead of who I am. Madison's expression shifted, and for a second Garrett thought he saw understanding flicker across her face. But then she shook her head. You didn't trust me, she said, and her voice carried a finality that made his chest tighten. That's what this comes down to. You thought I'd treat you differently if I knew. You thought I'd want something from you. Garrett didn't answer because she was right. That was exactly what he'd thought. What experience had trained him to think. What 12 years of watching people transform the moment they learned about money had taught him was inevitable. Madison stepped back, putting physical distance between them. I need some air. She walked away, navigating through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent her whole life at events like this. Paige glared at Garrett for a long moment before hurrying after her sister, wedding dress trailing behind her. Eleanor stood frozen, clearly torn between comforting her daughters and pursuing the billionaire investor who'd just been exposed at her youngest daughter's wedding. Tyler approached slowly, guilt written across his features like a confession. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to... Garrett held up a hand. It's not your fault. I just wanted them to know. Tyler's voice was earnest, desperate for Garrett to understand. I wanted them to see who you really are, what you've done, how you've changed lives without asking for anything in return. Garrett looked at him, at this man who'd meant well, who'd been trying to defend him, who'd had no idea what he was destroying in the process. They don't see who I am, Garrett said quietly. They see what I can do for them. There's a difference. He turned and walked out of the ballroom. No one tried to stop him, but he could feel them watching, could feel the shift that had occurred in the room. He wasn't Garrett anymore. Wasn't the man in the gray suit who didn't belong. He was Jay Parker. And that name came with expectations he'd spent 12 years trying to escape. Outside, the night air was cold, carrying the sharp clarity that October brought to Northern California. Garrett found a bench near one of the decorative fountains and sat down, pulling out his phone before remembering it was dead. Battery drained sometime during the ceremony, which felt appropriate somehow. He could hear the murmur of the reception starting up again inside, people pretending nothing had happened while absolutely talking about nothing else. Conversations would be happening right now, he knew. Speculation about his net worth, his portfolio, which companies he'd invested in. People would be Googling him, finding old Forbes articles, pulling up the sparse information that existed about Wells Capital and J. Parker. His anonymity, carefully cultivated over 12 years, had evaporated in the space of Tyler's confession. Inside, Madison stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens, arms wrapped around herself against the October chill. She'd escaped the ballroom 20 minutes ago, unable to stomach another pitying look or whispered speculation about the man she'd brought. The man she'd thought she knew. Her phone buzzed for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Eleanor's name appeared on the screen again. Madison let it go to voicemail. She had nothing to say to her mother right now, nothing that wouldn't make everything worse. The door opened behind her. Paige appeared, still in her wedding gown, expression caught between concern and irritation, a mix that probably summarized how Paige had felt about Madison for most of their lives. "You can't hide out here all night," Paige said. Madison didn't turn around. "Watch me." Paige moved to stand beside her, looking out at the manicured gardens that had cost more than most people made in a year. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Mother's going insane in there," Paige finally said. "Half the room wants to know how you met him. The other half wants introductions to the mysterious J. Parker for their various business ventures." "Tell them he's unavailable." Madison's voice came out flat, empty of the emotion churning underneath. "Madison, he left." "I know. I asked him to leave, and he did." Madison finally turned to look at her sister. "So there's nothing to introduce anyone to." Paige was quiet for a moment, then carefully, "Do you want to talk about what happened?" "You mean, do I want to discuss how the man I've been seeing for the past month turned out to be one of the wealthiest, most influential investors in the country?" Madison's laugh held no humor. "How I poured my heart out to him about my trust issues, about people who only want me for my family's money, and he just sat there nodding along like he couldn't possibly relate when he was dealing with the exact same thing but on a much larger scale." "He was probably trying to protect himself," Paige offered. Madison stared at her sister. From what? Paige's expression softened in a way Madison rarely saw. From what happened in there. Everyone treating him differently the second they knew. Everyone suddenly wanting access to him, wanting something from him. She paused. "Isn't that exactly what you were running from, too?" The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Madison had spent 10 years keeping people at arm's length, terrified they'd only want access to Bryant properties. She'd hidden in Portland, cultivated a separate life where she could just be Madison instead of Madison Bryant, heiress and CEO, where she could have coffee with someone without wondering if they'd Googled her net worth before sitting down. And she'd met Garrett doing the exact same thing. The symmetry should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like betrayal. "It's different," Madison said, but her voice lacked conviction. "How?" "Because I would have understood." Madison's voice rose, frustration breaking through the careful control she'd been maintaining. "If he'd told me the truth from the beginning, I would have gotten it. I would have seen that we were the same, that we were both trying to escape the weight of wealth and expectations." "But he didn't trust you enough for that," Paige said quietly. "No." Madison felt the word like a knife. "He didn't." Before she could say anything else, Eleanor appeared in the doorway. Eleanor had shed the desperate eagerness from earlier, replaced it with the cool composure she wore like armor, the mask of the matriarch. The woman who'd run Bryant Properties for 5 years since Thomas died. "Madison, darling, we need to talk." "Not now, Mother." "Yes, now." Eleanor stepped onto the terrace, closing the door behind her with a deliberate click. "That man, Garrett Wells or Jay Parker or whatever he calls himself, just walked away from the most important networking opportunity our family has had in a decade." Madison stared at her mother, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. "Is that really what you think this is about?" "What I think," Eleanor said precisely, "is that you brought someone significant into our circle without proper vetting, and now we're all scrambling to understand the implications." "Proper vetting?" Madison repeated the words like they tasted bitter. "You mean you wish you'd known he was rich before you sent me links to expensive suits because you were embarrassed by him?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I was trying to help you present well." "No." Madison moved toward the door, unable to stay in her mother's orbit another second. "You were trying to control how I looked to your friends, to make sure I didn't embarrass you by bringing someone who didn't meet your standards. And the second you found out Garrett had more money than most of them combined, you couldn't apologize fast enough." "I made a mistake in judgment," Eleanor said stiffly. "I'm attempting to correct it." "The only thing you're attempting to correct is your access to his investment portfolio." Madison pushed past her mother. "I'm going home." "Madison!" But she was already walking back through the ballroom, ignoring the eyes that tracked her movement, the whispered conversations that died as she passed. She found her driver, gave him an address she'd only seen once on Garrett's phone when he'd called a car. 15 minutes later, she stood outside a modest apartment building in a quiet Portland neighborhood, the kind of place where people worked regular jobs and worried about regular things. Nothing about it suggested wealth or power or influence, which was exactly the point, she realized. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on apartment 3C. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Still nothing. Madison pulled out her phone and called him, straight to voicemail. She tried twice more with the same result before accepting that he wasn't here, wasn't anywhere she could find him. She sat down on the floor outside his door, back against the wall, and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. Garrett drove for 2 hours before his phone battery died, which felt appropriate. He'd left his charger at home, left everything behind except the clothes he wore and the growing certainty that he'd destroyed something worth keeping. By the time he pulled into a rest stop outside Salem, exhaustion had settled into his bones. He couldn't go back to Portland yet, couldn't face the apartment that suddenly felt more like a hiding place than a home. His laptop was in the trunk, always there, always connected through encrypted channels to the network of investments that comprised Jay Parker's empire. He'd maintained the fiction that he could separate Garrett Wells from his professional identity, but the truth was simpler. He'd just gotten better at hiding. He opened the laptop in the harsh fluorescent light of the rest stop parking lot. 47 new emails, all sent in the last 3 hours. Investors who'd somehow obtained his personal address, suddenly eager to discuss partnership opportunities. Entrepreneurs who'd been sitting on his contact information for years, waiting for the right moment. Journalists asking for statements, interviews, clarification on how many companies he'd funded and how much money he'd made. The anonymity he'd cultivated for 12 years had evaporated in the span of Tyler Chambers's confession. One email stood out, from Jessica, his ex-wife. Subject line, "I saw the video." Of course there was a video. Of course it had already spread beyond the wedding, beyond the immediate circle of guests. That's what happened when something dramatic unfolded at a society event in the age of smartphones. It became content, entertainment, currency. He opened the email against his better judgment. Garrett, whatever you're thinking right now, don't do it. Don't run again. I know that's your instinct. It's always been your instinct. But running is what cost us our marriage. You can't keep hiding from who you are. Harper deserves a father who isn't afraid of being seen. And maybe this woman, whoever she is, deserves the same honesty. Jessica. Garrett closed the laptop. Jessica didn't get to have opinions about his choices anymore. She'd forfeited that right when she'd chosen the lifestyle over their family. But the word stuck anyway. Honesty. His phone remained dead. No way to call Harper to explain what had happened before she saw it online. No way to reach Madison, not that she'd answer anyway. He was completely alone. Which was what he'd claimed to want for 12 years. Turned out wanting something and living with it were different things. Garrett dozed in the car until dawn, then drove back to Portland as the city woke up. Sunday morning meant fewer people on the streets, fewer eyes that might recognize him from viral videos they'd scrolled past during their morning coffee. He made it to his apartment building without incident, climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Madison was sitting outside his door, asleep against the wall. Her makeup had smudged during the night, mascara creating dark shadows beneath her eyes. Her carefully styled hair had fallen loose, waves becoming tangles. She still wore the navy dress from the wedding, now wrinkled from sitting on the floor for hours. She looked exhausted and young, and nothing like the polished woman who'd picked him up for the wedding. She looked like the person he'd met at Oakwood Cafe. Garrett knelt beside her, close enough that his movement disturbed her sleep. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused for a moment before recognition hit. She sat up straighter. Your phone's been off. Battery died. I've been here since midnight. She checked her own phone, squinting at the brightness. It's 6:30. Garrett checked his watch. You've been sitting in a hallway for 6.5 hours? I needed to know if you were okay. Her voice carried something raw, stripped of the anger from the wedding. And I needed to know if I was. He unlocked his door and gestured for her to come inside. The apartment was exactly what it appeared to be. Modest furniture, shelves of actual books instead of designer objects, a kitchen that showed signs of real use. No expensive art on the walls, no status symbols, just a space where someone lived quietly. Madison walked through it slowly, taking in details. She stopped at the small bookshelf near the window, running her finger along the spines. Half of them matched books they'd discussed at the cafe. This is really your life, she said, and it wasn't a question. This is really my life, Garrett confirmed. He moved to the kitchen, started coffee out of habit. The familiar routine of grinding beans, measuring water, waiting for the machine to hiss and gurgle, felt grounding in a way nothing else had since Tyler had knelt in front of him. The other thing, Madison continued, still looking at the books. J. Parker, the investments, all of it. That's work. This is where I live. Madison turned to face him. Tell me the whole story. Not the version you think I can handle, the actual truth. So Garrett did. He told her about meeting Jessica at Stanford, both of them young and ambitious and convinced they'd conquer the world together. About building Wells Capital from nothing, making smart bets that paid off exponentially, becoming the kind of success story that business schools taught as case studies. He told her about the slow realization that Jessica loved the lifestyle more than the life. about watching her transform from a partner into a socialite, from someone who cared about impact into someone who measured worth in invitations and appearances and the right circles. He told her about Harper being born when he was 38, about the overwhelming desire to give his daughter something different than the world he'd built, about trying to pull back from the relentless pace, wanting to be present for bedtime stories and school plays instead of always chasing the next deal. And he told her about the breaking point. Discovering Jessica had committed $50 million of their fund to a startup he'd explicitly rejected, simply because the founder was married to her friend. The company had collapsed 6 months later, taking their money and their reputation with it. I confronted her, Garrett said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. She told me I was being selfish, that I owed it to Harper to give her the world. But I looked at our 2-year-old daughter, and all I saw was a future where she'd be valued for her last name instead of who she was. He handed Madison a cup, their fingers brushing briefly. So I filed for divorce, walked away from Wells Capital, changed my name legally to just Garrett Wells, dropped the third that connected me to my grandfather's legacy, started investing under the pseudonym J. Parker so I could keep doing what I was good at without being a public figure. Madison accepted the coffee, wrapping her hands around the warmth. And Jessica got the San Francisco house, the social circle, everything she wanted. I got primary custody of Harper and anonymity. Garrett leaned against the counter. Harper stays with her every other week because I won't take my daughter away from her mother, even if we have different values about what matters. Jessica remarried within 2 years. Venture capitalist, even wealthier than I was. Harper goes to private school, has everything money can buy. He met Madison's eyes. And I live here, trying to give her at least one parent who values her for more than her potential to enhance our status. The story settled between them, heavy with implications. Madison set her coffee down carefully. Why didn't you tell me about Harper from the beginning? Because the moment I mention having a daughter, people ask questions, Garrett said. Where does she go to school? Where does her mother live? Why did the marriage end? Every question leads back to who I was, what I walked away from, why I left. He met her eyes. I wanted to keep you separate from all that. I wanted there to be one part of my life that existed outside the narrative. But I'm not a part of your life, Madison said quietly. I'm a person who deserves to know who she's spending time with. You're right. The admission came easier than Garrett expected. You're absolutely right. I was so focused on protecting myself that I didn't think about what I was taking from you. Madison moved to the window, looking out at the Portland morning. Light was beginning to filter through the buildings, turning the sky from black to deep blue to the pale gray that preceded sunrise. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Garrett nodded. 10 years ago, I was engaged, Madison said, still facing the window. His name was Blake Mitchell, brilliant architect, built sustainable housing for low-income communities through a nonprofit he'd started right out of college. She turned to face Garrett, pain evident in her expression. I loved that he didn't care about money or status or any of the things that defined my family. We dated for 2 years before I told him about Bryant Properties. Before that, I just said I worked in real estate. True enough, vague enough. When he found out the truth, that I was worth hundreds of millions personally, that my family basically owned half of Portland's commercial real estate, everything changed. Garrett stayed quiet, letting her work through it. He started asking my opinion on business decisions, Madison continued. Wanted introductions to investors. Eventually proposed a partnership where Bryant Properties would fund his housing projects. Her voice went flat. When I said no, that I wanted to keep work and personal separate, he accused me of not believing in his vision. I broke off the engagement, she said quietly. And I've spent 10 years alone because I couldn't tell if anyone wanted me or wanted access to my family's resources. The parallel hit Garrett like a physical blow. They'd been running from the same thing, just approaching it from opposite directions. So when I met you at Oakwood, and you didn't ask what I did, didn't try to impress me, just existed quietly in the same space. She met his eyes. I thought I'd finally found someone who saw me. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe we're so used to people wanting us for the wrong reasons that we can't recognize when someone might want us for the right ones. She picked up her purse, moving toward the door. Garrett's chest tightened. Where are you going? I don't. And one text from Harper, sent at 7 that morning. Dad, call me when you wake up. I saw the videos. We need to talk. Garrett called immediately. Harper picked up on the first ring. Dad, holy shit! Language. Dad, you're trending on Twitter. Her voice carried concern rather than excitement. There are like 15 different videos of Tyler kneeling in front of you. People are pulling up old Forbes articles trying to figure out how much you're worth. She paused. Are you okay? Garrett sank onto his couch. I'm not sure yet. What about the woman, Madison Bryant? I looked her up. CEO of Bryant Properties. Pretty major real estate developer. Harper's voice softened. That's who you've been seeing? Was seeing. Probably. Harper was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried disappointment. You didn't tell her, did you? No. Dad. The single word contained volumes. I told you she needed to know. I know you did. I should have listened. Garrett rubbed his face with his free hand. How bad is it online? It's not bad, exactly, Harper said carefully. Most people are impressed. They're calling you a genius, praising you for staying anonymous, speculating about other companies you might have funded. She paused, and Garrett heard the shift in her tone. But there are also people trying to figure out where you live, where I go to school. Mom's freaking out a little. Garrett's protective instincts fired immediately. Are you safe? I'm fine, Dad. Mom hired extra security for the house, which is totally over the top but makes her feel better. Harper's voice took on a more serious tone. I'm more worried about you. I'll be okay. Will you, though? Harper's voice was gentle but direct. You spent 12 years building walls to keep people out, and now those walls just got demolished in front of 200 people with smartphones. That's not nothing. She was right. Of course, she was right. Harper was usually right about things that mattered. I'll figure it out, Garrett said, though he had no idea how. What about Madison? Garrett looked at the door she'd walked through an hour ago. I don't know. I think I broke something I can't fix. Do you want to fix it? The question hung there, deceptively simple. Did he want to fix it? Did he want to let someone in, risk the exposure and judgment and potential betrayal that came with being fully known? Before he could answer, his doorbell rang. Harper, I need to go. Someone's here. Okay. But, Dad? She paused. Whatever you decide about Madison, don't decide based on fear. Decide based on what you actually want. They hung up. Garrett went to the door, expecting Madison had come back, maybe thought of something else to say. Instead, he found Eleanor Bryant standing in his hallway, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. Mr. Wells, Eleanor said. May I come in? Garrett stepped aside, too surprised to refuse. Eleanor entered with the bearing of someone accustomed to being welcome everywhere. She surveyed his apartment with the same assessing gaze she'd used at the wedding, but this time her expression revealed nothing. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "A real one, not the networking preamble I attempted last night." She remained standing, hands folded in front of her. "I judged you based on appearances, on assumptions about who you were and what you could offer my daughter. I treated you as if you didn't belong in our world, and I made you feel unwelcome in our home." The words sounded rehearsed, but not insincere. Garrett waited for the other shoe to drop. "That was wrong," Eleanor continued. "You were a guest at Madison's invitation, and you deserved respect regardless of your background or bank account." Her voice wavered slightly. "I've just said the same thing to the remaining guests still at the manor. I wanted to say it to you directly." "Why?" Garrett asked. "Because Madison threatened to resign from Bryant Properties and remove herself from the family trust if I didn't." Eleanor's composure cracked just slightly. "My daughter is willing to walk away from everything she's built, everything our family represents, rather than be associated with how we treated you." She met his eyes. "That tells me I misjudged more than just your financial status." Garrett processed this. Madison had gone to war with her family over him, had drawn a line and dared them to cross it. "You didn't need to do this for me, Mrs. Bryant. You needed to do it for your daughter." "I'm aware," Eleanor said quietly. She moved toward the door, then paused. "Madison's father, my husband, died 5 years ago. Heart attack while volunteering at a Habitat for Humanity build." She turned to look at Garrett. "He spent 40 years building Bryant Properties from a one-man carpentry business into what it is today." Her voice softened. "He used to say, 'The measure of a person is how they treat those who can do nothing for them.'" Eleanor's eyes held something Garrett hadn't expected to see. Genuine regret. "I failed that test spectacularly yesterday. I wanted you to know that I recognized it." After Eleanor left, Garrett sat in his apartment and tried to make sense of the past 18 hours. His carefully constructed life had collapsed. His anonymity was gone. The woman he'd started falling for knew he'd been lying by omission for weeks. And somehow, in the wreckage of all that, things were still moving forward. His phone buzzed with a new email. The sender name made his jaw clench. Brett Sullivan. Subject line: Partnership Opportunity. Time Sensitive. Garrett knew that name. Brett Sullivan was a venture partner with a reputation for aggressive tactics and questionable ethics. They'd crossed paths years ago when Garrett was still running Wells Capital. Brett had tried to poach several of his investments, had spread rumors to damage his reputation when Garrett refused to collaborate. He opened the email, already knowing he wouldn't like what he found. "Garrett, congratulations on your recent exposure. Must be difficult having your privacy invaded like that. I've been following your career with interest. Your daughter Harper seems like a bright girl. 14, right? I believe she attends Meadowbrook Academy in San Francisco. I'm reaching out about a mutually beneficial arrangement. My fund is looking for strategic co-investors. Someone with your track record would be invaluable. Of course, if you're not interested, I understand, though I'd hate to see Harper's school situation become complicated. The media can be so intrusive when they get hold of certain information. Looking forward to your response." Brett Garrett's hands tightened on his phone. This wasn't a business proposition. It was a threat, thinly veiled as professional courtesy. Brett Sullivan was threatening his daughter. He immediately forwarded the email to his lawyer, Steve Anderson, with a simple message: "Need to talk. Now." Then he called Harper back. Dad? What's wrong? New security protocol, Garrett said, his voice tight with controlled fury. I'm hiring someone. Professional. Full-time. Dad, you're scaring me. Someone's making threats, Garrett said. It's handled, but I need you safe until it is. This was the cost of exposure. This was what he'd been trying to avoid for 12 years. Not just the networking requests and the loss of privacy, but the very real danger that came with being known, being visible, being vulnerable. And now Madison was caught in the crossfire too. Madison sat in her condo, staring at her phone. She hadn't slept in over 30 hours. She was still wearing the navy dress from the wedding, now hopelessly wrinkled. Her feet ached from the heels she'd finally kicked off somewhere near the door. Videos of the wedding scene were everywhere. Billionaire exposed at sister's wedding. Mystery investor Jay Parker finally revealed. Groom kneels before secret tycoon. The comments ranged from admiration to speculation to outright gossip. People were analyzing every frame, every expression on her face, every word that had been caught on the various recordings. Her phone buzzed. Paige calling. Are you okay? Her sister asked immediately. I don't know. Mom told me what she did. Going to Garrett's apartment this morning. Madison sat up straighter. What? She went at like 7 a.m., Paige explained. Apologized directly to him. Told him about Dad's habitat work, the whole thing. She actually seemed genuine. That doesn't fix anything, Madison said. No, Paige agreed. But it's a start. There was a pause. Then Paige said carefully, Can I say something you won't want to hear? When has that stopped you? You're mad at him for the same thing you did to him. Madison opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. You hid who you were, Paige continued. He hid who he was. You're both terrified of being wanted for the wrong reasons. The only difference is he had more to hide. Or maybe he just had more experience with how badly it goes when people find out. Madison hated that her sister was right. She'd performed a version of herself too. Woman who works in real estate. Technically true, massively understated. She'd never mentioned Bryant properties, family wealth, board meetings. Had wanted someone to want her without calculating what she could do for them. So what do I do? Madison asked quietly. That depends, Paige said. Do you love him? The question hung in the air. Did she love Garrett Wells? The man in the gray suit who'd sat across from her at Oakwood Cafe? Or did she love Jay Parker, the brilliant investor who'd reshaped Silicon Valley from the shadows? Or were they the same person, and she'd just been too caught up in her own fear and anger to see it? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Not Garrett's usual contact, that was still blocked. This is Garrett. I understand if you need time, but I want you to know, Harper's in danger. Someone's threatening her because of the exposure. I'm handling it, but I thought you should know the cost of what happened. Asterisk. Madison's anger evaporated instantly, replaced by cold fear. She called the number immediately. Garrett picked up on the second ring. Madison, what happened to Harper? He explained about Brett Sullivan. The email, the veiled threats about Harper's school, the implication that Brett could make her life very difficult if Garrett didn't cooperate. What do you need? Madison asked. Garrett was quiet for a moment, clearly surprised by the question. What? What do you need? How can I help? Another pause. I don't know. I've handled things alone for so long, I'm not sure. You don't have to anymore, Madison interrupted. Not if you don't want to. She took a breath. I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. But a 14-year-old girl shouldn't pay for our mistakes. Let me help. Then we can figure out us. Garrett's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. Okay, within an hour, they had a plan. Steve Anderson, Garrett's lawyer, had set up a meeting with Brett Sullivan for Monday morning. Under the pretense of discussing a partnership, They'd actually be documenting Brett's extortion attempt with recording devices and building a legal case. Madison insisted on being there. "This isn't your fight," Garrett said when she showed up at his apartment at 7 a.m. Monday, wearing a sharp business suit and carrying 2 coffees. "Someone's threatening a 14-year-old girl because of what happened at my sister's wedding," Madison said firmly. "That makes it my fight." They met Steve at a downtown Portland coffee shop, neutral territory, public enough to seem innocent, but quiet enough for conversation. Brett Sullivan arrived right on time. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. He saw Garrett, then Madison, and something flickered across his face. "Ms. Bryant, didn't expect to see you here." Madison's voice could have frozen water. "Mr. Sullivan." They sat at a corner table. Steve had already positioned recording equipment, legal in Oregon as long as one party consented, which Garrett did. Brett launched into his pitch, smooth and practiced. "Garrett, I've admired your work for years. Jay Parker's track record speaks for itself. Now that you're public, the opportunities are endless. My fund focuses on aggressive growth strategies," Brett continued. "High risk, high reward. We could dominate the biotech sector, the AI space, sustainable energy. With your capital and my network—" "And if I'm not interested?" Garrett asked calmly. Brett's smile sharpened. "Then I'd be concerned about privacy. There's a lot of interest in your family situation. Your daughter's school, for instance. Meadowbrook Academy, right? Beautiful campus. Would be a shame if that information became public. The media can be so intrusive." Madison pulled out her phone. "Are you threatening a child, Mr. Sullivan?" "I'm discussing business realities, Miss Bryant." "Business realities like this?" Madison turned her phone around, showing security camera footage. It showed Brett Sullivan following a teenage girl, clearly Harper, from Meadowbrook Academy's campus the previous week. The timestamp was clear. The stalking was undeniable. Brett's face drained of color. Steve Anderson appeared from a back table where he'd been working on his laptop, approaching with a document folder. "Mr. Sullivan, we have video evidence, email records, and witness statements documenting your harassment and extortion attempts." He placed a cease and desist agreement on the table. "You have 2 choices. Sign this immediately, agreeing never to contact the Wells family or discuss their private information publicly, or we file criminal charges for stalking a minor, extortion, and racketeering." Brett looked between Garrett, Madison, and Steve. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the pen. "This isn't over," he muttered as he signed. "Yes, it is," Garrett said calmly. "You go near my daughter, contact my family, or spread information about my investments," Madison finished, "and Bryant Properties will bury you in litigation. We have more lawyers than you have money." Brett left, the document signed, his threat neutralized. Outside the coffee shop, Garrett turned to Madison. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. I wanted to." Madison managed a small smile. "Also, your lawyer is very good." "I've been waiting to take down Brett Sullivan for years," Steve said with satisfaction. "Thank you for the opportunity." He excused himself, leaving them alone on the sidewalk. The Portland morning was crisp, clouds threatening rain. People rushed past on their way to work, oblivious to the drama that had just played out in the coffee shop. "Thank you," Garrett said quietly. "For Harper. For showing up." Madison met his eyes. "I meant what I said. I'm still angry, still hurt. But I also understand why you hid. Because I did the same thing." She stepped closer. "And I'm tired of being alone." Garrett's voice was barely audible. "I'm terrified of this. Of letting you in. Of you seeing everything and deciding I'm not worth it." "What if I'm terrified of the same thing?" Madison asked. "What if we're both disasters? But we're disasters together." The moment stretched between them. Possibility and fear balanced on a knife's edge. "No more secrets," Garrett said. "Not about money, not about the past, not about anything important." "No more performing," Madison agreed. "Not with each other. We try this with the truth. All of it." All of it, Garrett confirmed. He kissed her. First time since the wedding explosion. Real, vulnerable, terrifying. Choosing to be seen. Eleanor's invitation came midweek via text to Madison. I'd like to have dinner. All of us. Garrett, Harper if she's willing. Saturday evening at my house. No agenda, no expectations. Just trying to do better. Madison showed Garrett the text when they met at Oakwood Cafe on Thursday. Their routine restored, but transformed by honesty. Your call, Madison said. If you want to bring Harper or not. Garrett called his daughter that evening. Your presence is requested at a family dinner. Madison's mother wants to apologize properly. All of us together. Harper's response was immediate. Are you kidding? I've been dying to meet the woman who got you to stop hiding. It might be uncomfortable, Garrett warned. Dad, I need to evaluate her and her family. Make sure they're good enough for you. Garrett smiled. Shouldn't that be my line? You're terrible at vetting people, Harper said matter-of-factly. You either trust completely or not at all. No middle ground with you. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Garrett had spent 12 years trusting almost no one, building walls so high that even people who deserved access couldn't climb them. We can try, he told Harper. Saturday evening arrived with the weight of a test they might fail. Garrett and Harper drove up together from Portland. Harper had insisted on research, which apparently meant she'd spent the week reading everything she could find about the Bryant family, their business, and their philanthropic work. Eleanor seems intense, Harper observed as they pulled up to the house. But she genuinely loved her husband. There are like 20 interviews where she talks about Thomas's building philosophy. You really did your homework, Garrett said. Dad, these people judged you for wearing a normal suit. I'm coming prepared. Madison answered the door herself. She looked at Harper with genuine warmth. You must be Harper. I've heard so much about you. Ms. Bryant, Harper said politely, then smiled. Though I'm guessing you prefer Madison? I do. Madison stepped aside to let them in. And I'm glad you're here. Eleanor waited in the living room with Paige. The dining room table was visible through an archway, takeout containers from a Thai restaurant, deliberately casual. Garrett, Harper, thank you for coming, Eleanor said. Her voice carried none of the desperation from the wedding, or even the careful formality of her apartment visit. She sounded almost normal. Tyler was notably absent. He thought his presence might be awkward, Paige explained quickly. Given, everything. They served themselves buffet style. The casualness was clearly intentional, designed to put everyone at ease, though the effort itself carried its own tension. Harper handled it with remarkable poise. Mrs. Bryant, thank you for inviting me. I know this is complicated. Please, call me Eleanor. The older woman's smile seemed genuine. And yes, it's complicated, but important. As they ate, conversation started carefully. Paige talked about the honeymoon they'd finally rescheduled. Madison mentioned a Bryant Properties development. Safe topics. Then Harper, with the directness only teenagers could manage, cut through the pretense. So you didn't approve of my dad at first? Eleanor had the grace to look embarrassed. I had concerns based on appearances. But you approved of Tyler more, Harper continued. Even though Tyler owed Dad everything. The observation landed like a stone in still water. Eleanor set down her fork. You're right. That was wrong of me. I judged your father based on appearances without knowing anything real about him. She met Garrett's eyes. I'm trying to be better than that. Trying is good, Harper said. But it's also really easy to slip back into old patterns when you're stressed or scared. Madison reached under the table, found Garrett's hand. Harper's right. We all have to keep choosing to be better. Every day. One decision at a time. The conversation shifted after that, tension easing gradually. Paige discovered she and Harper shared a love of Greek mythology. They launched into an animated discussion about whether Percy Jackson or Madeline Miller's Circe had the better portrayal of the gods. Madison and Eleanor got drawn into a technical discussion about adaptive reuse projects, taking old buildings and converting them for modern use, while preserving historic character. Garrett found himself talking to Eleanor about Thomas. "He would have seen you immediately," Eleanor said quietly. "Would have recognized the quality underneath the presentation. I failed to do that because I've spent 5 years trying to protect what he built instead of honoring how he built it." "He sounds like someone worth knowing," Garrett said. "He would have liked you. The real you. Both versions." Eleanor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He believed people mattered more than their credentials. I forgot that. I won't forget it again." After dinner, they moved to the living room. Harper gravitated toward photos of Thomas, asking questions about the man she'd never met. Eleanor answered thoughtfully, sharing stories that made Thomas real instead of mythological. About the time he'd personally helped frame a house for a habitat family during a rainstorm. About his insistence on hiring people based on character. About his belief that buildings should serve people, not the other way around. Harper listened intently, then turned to Eleanor with the same directness she'd shown all evening. "Dad says you invited us to family dinners going forward. Like a regular thing?" "If you're both willing, yes," Eleanor said. "I'd like us to be family. Real family, not just people connected by who's dating whom." Harper looked at Garrett, silently asking permission. He nodded. "We can try," Harper said. 2 weeks after the wedding, Tuesday morning arrived with the comfort of routine restored. Garrett and Madison met at Oakwood Cafe. Same corner booth, same black coffee, same comfortable silence that had drawn them together in the first place. But everything was different now. They arrived together, left together. The bubble of anonymity was gone, replaced by something more solid. Honesty. The barista approached with the coffee pot, grinning. "You two still doing the Tuesday-Thursday thing, even though you're actually dating now?" Madison smiled. "Especially because we're dating. This is where it started." "Smart," the barista said, refilling their cups. "Keep the thing that worked." She paused, smirking. "Also, for what it's worth, I called it back in week 2. Told my coworker you'd be together within a month." After she left, Garrett reached across the table. Madison placed her hand in his, the gesture now familiar but still significant. "I've been thinking about something," Garrett said. "That sounds ominous. I want you to meet Jessica, Harper's mom." Madison's eyebrows rose. "You want me to meet your ex-wife?" "She's part of my life whether I like it or not," Garrett explained. "And if we're doing this for real, you should understand that dynamic. How we co-parent, how we navigate the fact that Harper lives in both our worlds." "I'd like that," Madison said, though her voice carried nervousness. "Even though it sounds terrifying." "It will be," Garrett agreed. "Jessica can be intense, but she's Harper's mother, and that matters." "Harper suggested next weekend," he continued. "The rip-off-the-Band-Aid approach." Madison laughed. "Your daughter is wiser than both of us." The cafe door opened. A businessman in an expensive suit walked in, looked around, spotted Garrett. He approached with the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. "Jay Parker, sorry to interrupt, but I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I have a startup that would be perfect for your portfolio." Garrett held up a hand. "I don't take meetings at cafes or anywhere else without prior arrangement through my lawyer." The man blinked, clearly not used to rejection. "But this is a limited opportunity. If you could just hear the pitch." Madison's voice cut through, calm but firm. "He said no. Please leave us alone." The man looked between them, finally registering that he'd intruded on something private. He left, muttering about missed opportunities. After he was gone, Garrett let out a breath. "That's going to keep happening. People recognizing me, wanting access, pushing boundaries." Madison's grip on his hand tightened. "Then we'll handle it together. You're not alone in this anymore. You get to choose that now." Garrett looked at her, really looked at her, and saw everything he'd been afraid of wanting for 12 years. Someone who saw him completely and stayed anyway. Someone willing to fight through the complications and fear and inevitable difficulties. Someone worth the risk of being seen. "I love you," he said. The words came out before he'd planned them, raw and honest and terrifying. Madison's eyes widened, then softened. I love you too. Even though we're both disasters, she continued. Even though this is complicated. Even though we're probably going to mess this up 100 times before we get it right. Especially because of all that, Garrett said. They sat in Oakwood Cafe, hands linked across the table. Two people who'd spent years hiding, finally choosing to be found. The morning light filtered through the windows, turning dust motes into floating stars. Coffee steamed between them. The barista hummed while making drinks. The college student typed furiously near the window. The crossword enthusiast muttered over his puzzle. Everything was ordinary and extraordinary at once. The following Saturday, Garrett picked Madison up early. They were driving to San Francisco together, 3 hours in the car, which Madison had joked was either the best idea or the worst for a relationship still finding its footing. Harper suggested neutral territory, Garrett explained as they merged onto I-5 South. So we're meeting at a restaurant in the marina. Public, casual, lots of exits if it goes badly. You're really selling this, Madison said. Jessica isn't easy, Garrett said carefully. She means well, loves Harper fiercely, but she has very strong opinions about how things should be done. Did she remarry for love or for money? The question was blunt, but Garrett appreciated the directness. Both, I think. Richard is wealthy, wealthier than I ever was, but he's also kind to Harper. That matters more than I want it to. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the landscape shifting from Portland's evergreens to the drier hills of Northern California. Can I ask you something? Madison said eventually. Anything. If Tyler hadn't recognized you at the wedding, would you have ever told me the truth? Garrett considered this carefully. I'd like to think yes. That eventually, if things kept going the way they were going, I would have found the courage. He glanced at her. But honestly, I don't know. I'd gotten very good at hiding. What changed? Harper, Garrett said simply. She kept asking the question I didn't want to answer. What happens when she finds out? She knew secrets had consequences. I just didn't want to face them. Madison was quiet for a moment. I'm glad it happened. Not the way it happened, that was awful. But the fact that now I know who you really are. Both versions. Jester. They arrived at the restaurant right on time. Jessica was already there, sitting at an outdoor table with Harper. Jessica looked exactly like Garrett had described. Polished, elegant, the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. Her hair was perfectly styled, her outfit expensive but understated. She stood when they approached, and Garrett made introductions. Jessica, this is Madison Bryant. Madison, my ex-wife, Jessica Wells. Just Jessica Carter now. Jessica corrected with a slight smile, using her current married name. She extended a hand to Madison. It's nice to meet you. Harper hasn't stopped talking about you for 2 weeks. Harper rolled her eyes but smiled. I said nice things. They sat, ordered drinks. The awkwardness settled over them like fog. Jessica broke the silence first. I owe you an apology, Garrett. I sent you that email after the wedding without really thinking about what you were going through. It wasn't my place to lecture you about honesty. Garrett was genuinely surprised. Jessica rarely apologized. I've spent a lot of time thinking about our marriage, Jessica continued, about why it fell apart. I blamed you for leaving, for walking away from Wells Capital, for choosing anonymity over success. She paused. But the truth is, I pushed you there. I made our relationship about what we had instead of who we were. Harper was watching her mother with wide eyes, clearly hearing some of this for the first time. I don't know if Madison is the one or whatever, Jessica said, looking at both of them. But I can see that you're different with her, Garrett. Lighter. More like the person you were when we first met, before everything got complicated. She turned to Madison. He's going to drive you crazy sometimes. He overthinks everything. He'll want to solve problems instead of just listening. But he's also the most principled person I've ever known. And he'll show up for you. Always. Even when it's hard. Madison smiled. I'm starting to figure that out. Jester. Lunch proceeded more smoothly after that. Jessica asked Madison about Bryant Properties, clearly having done her research. They discovered a mutual interest in adaptive reuse projects. Jessica's current husband, Richard, invested in historic preservation. Harper dominated the conversation at times, telling embarrassing stories about Garrett that made Madison laugh and made him groan. As they were finishing dessert, Jessica said quietly to Garrett, "You did good. With her. With finally letting someone in." "It's terrifying," Garrett admitted. "The best things usually are." On the drive back to Portland, Madison was quiet for the first hour. Finally, she said, "Your ex-wife is impressive." "She has her moments. She really does love Harper." "Yeah," Garrett agreed. "We failed at a lot of things, Jessica and I. But we both got that part right." Madison reached over, took his hand. "You know what I realized today?" "What?" "We're building something. Not just you and me, but all of us. Harper, my family, your family, even Jessica. It's messy and complicated, and there are a lot of moving parts." She squeezed his hand. "But it's real. No performance, no pretending. Just people trying to figure it out together." Garrett brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. "I love you." "I know," Madison said, smiling. "You told me at Oakwood, in front of the barista and the crossword guy and everyone." "I want good," Madison said, "because you're stuck with me now." The next 6 months unfolded with the rhythm of lives intertwining. Harper spent alternating weeks between San Francisco and Portland, but now Portland meant Garrett's apartment and, increasingly, Madison's condo. The teenager had declared Madison's guest room way better than Dad's second bedroom because it had faster Wi-Fi. Eleanor hosted family dinners once a month. They were still sometimes awkward, but less so each time. Eleanor made a genuine effort to ask about Harper's school, Garrett's work, Madison's projects without pushing for networking opportunities or business advantages. Garrett started appearing at Bryant Properties events when Madison asked, not hiding who he was, but not advertising it either. He learned to navigate the attention, to deflect unwanted pitches politely but firmly. Madison met more of Garrett's portfolio companies, understanding for the first time the scope of what Jay Parker had built. Not just money, but opportunities. Not just investments, but belief in people others had written off. They still met at Oakwood Cafe every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Sacred time, protected time, where they could just be Garrett and Madison without the weight of everything else. The last one Tuesday in June, 6 months after the wedding, Garrett was waiting at their usual booth when Madison arrived, looking unusually serious. "We need to talk," she said, sitting down. Garrett's stomach dropped. Those 4 words never preceded anything good. "Okay," he said carefully. Madison pulled out her laptop, opened it to show him a presentation. Bryant Properties has an opportunity to acquire a portfolio of historic buildings in Seattle. 15 properties, all early 20th century, all in need of renovation and adaptive reuse. She clicked through slides showing beautiful but deteriorating buildings. Brick facades, ornate windows, the bones of something magnificent hidden under decades of neglect. "It's a huge project," Madison continued. "Probably 3 to 5 years of work. $70 million investment minimum, possibly more depending on what we find during renovation." Garrett nodded, not sure where this was going. "I want to do it," Madison said, "but I need a partner. Someone who understands the financial side, who can help structure the investment, who knows how to evaluate risk and opportunity." She looked at him directly. "I want that partner to be you." Garrett sat back, processing. "You want to go into business together?" "I want to build something together," Madison corrected. "Not mixing our companies. Bryant Properties stays Bryant Properties. Your investment portfolio stays yours. But this project, this opportunity, I want us to do it as partners. Equal stake, equal say, equal risk." She paused. "My family thinks I'm crazy." Eleanor pointed out all the statistics about couples who go into business together. Paige asked if I was sure I wanted to risk our relationship over a real estate deal. And what did you say? I said that you and I built our relationship on honesty and partnership from the beginning, Madison said. That we've already navigated family drama, public exposure, and extortion threats together. That if we can handle all that, we can probably handle some historic buildings. Garrett looked at the presentation, at the buildings with their potential hidden under grime and disrepair. He thought about Thomas Bryant, who'd built an empire from carpentry, about his own journey from Wells Capital to anonymity to this moment. There's one condition, he said. Madison's expression shifted to concern. What? We hire from the local community, Garrett said. Not just contractors, but the renovation crews. We train people who need opportunities. We make this project about more than just profit. Madison's smile was brilliant. Thomas would have loved you. Is that a yes? That's a yes, Garrett confirmed. Partners. They shook hands across the table, formal and ridiculous and perfect. The barista walked by, saw them shaking hands over their coffee. You two closing business deals now? What happened to the mysterious strangers thing you had going? We evolved, Madison said. Character growth, Garrett added. Very dramatic. The barista laughed. Well, congratulations on whatever that was. More coffee? Always, they said in unison. 14 months after the wedding that changed everything. Garrett stood outside Oakwood Cafe at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, waiting for the owner to let him in early. He'd made special arrangements. The barista, whose name he'd finally learned was Kelly, had agreed to open the cafe an hour before usual. The crossword enthusiast, whose name was Frank, had been recruited to sit in his usual spot for authenticity. Harper was hiding in the back room with her phone, ready to record. Madison thought they were meeting for their normal Tuesday coffee, had no idea anything was different. Garrett had spent 3 months planning this, had consulted with Harper, who'd provided surprisingly sophisticated input about romance and meaningful moments, had awkwardly asked Eleanor for her blessing, which she'd given with tears in her eyes, had even called Jessica, who'd said, "About time." The ring was in his pocket. Simple, elegant, exactly Madison's style. He'd had it designed by a jeweler Harper had found, a woman who created custom pieces using ethically sourced stones and recycled metals, because Madison cared about things like that. At 7:30, Madison's car pulled up outside. Garrett's hands started sweating. Jester. Madison walked in, surprised to find the cafe nearly empty. Just Frank with his crossword, Kelly behind the counter, and Garrett at their usual booth. Are we early? Madison asked, checking her watch. I thought we said 7:30. We did, Garrett said. I asked Kelly to open early, just for us. Madison sat down across from him, her expression shifting to curiosity. What's going on? Kelly appeared with 2 black coffees, already prepared exactly how they liked them. She set them down with a knowing smile and retreated. Garrett took a breath. 14 months ago, he began, I walked into a wedding where I didn't belong, wearing a suit that wasn't expensive enough, carrying secrets I thought would protect me. Madison's eyes widened slightly, beginning to understand. I thought if people knew who I really was, they'd only see what I could do for them, Garrett continued. I thought wealth meant isolation, that success meant loneliness, that the only way to be safe was to hide. He reached across the table, took her hand. And then Tyler Chambers knelt in front of me and destroyed 12 years of careful anonymity. And I was terrified. Not because people would know about the money, but because you would know I'd lied to you. That I'd hidden who I was because I didn't trust you with the truth. Garrett, Madison started, but he gently squeezed her hand. Let me finish, he said softly. You could have walked away. You had every right to. I'd lied by omission, had made decisions about what you could handle without giving you a choice. But you didn't walk away. You showed up. You helped protect Harper. You chose to see past the hurt to the fear underneath. He stood up, moved around to her side of the booth. Madison's breath caught. Garrett knelt, not in the dramatic public way Tyler had, but quietly, privately, in the space where they'd first found each other. Madison Bryant, you taught me that being seen isn't the same as being exposed, that trust isn't weakness, that partnership means sharing both the truth and the risk. He pulled out the ring. Will you marry me? Madison's hands flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, yes, yes, of course yes. Garrett slipped the ring on her finger with hands that trembled slightly. She pulled him up, kissed him, laughed and cried at the same time. Kelly started clapping from behind the counter. Frank looked up from his crossword and smiled. Harper burst out of the back room, phone recording, cheering loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. You knew? Madison asked Harper through her tears. Dad asked my permission like 3 months ago, Harper said, still recording. I said yes, obviously. Someone needs to make him less boring. Hey, Garrett protested, but he was smiling. Madison pulled Harper into a hug. Then all three of them were hugging, laughing, a family that had formed through honesty and choice rather than blood. 6 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in early spring, Garrett Wells stood at an altar. Not at Bryant Estate, with its marble fountains and 250 judgment-filled guests, but in a small garden in Portland, surrounded by maybe 60 people who actually mattered to them. Harper stood beside him as his best person, wearing a suit she'd picked out herself. Steve Anderson was there, along with a handful of portfolio company founders Garrett had supported over the years. Kelly from Oakwood Cafe, Frank with his crossword puzzles. On Madison's side, Eleanor, who'd helped plan every detail. Paige, who'd flown in from her honeymoon in Bali to be Madison's maid of honor. A few close friends from Bryant Properties, Thomas's former construction foreman who'd worked with him for 30 years, and Jessica, who sat in the third row with her current husband Richard, smiling genuinely. The ceremony was simple. No elaborate production, no performance for social media. Just vows they'd written themselves, promises made in front of people who knew them. When the officiant said, "You may kiss your bride," Garrett didn't hesitate, and this jester. At the reception, held at a restored historic building from their Seattle project, still under renovation but functional enough for a party, Garrett found himself standing with Madison on the terrace, watching their guests mingle. Tyler Chambers approached nervously, Paige beside him. It was the first time they'd spoken since the disastrous wedding 14 months ago. I owe you an apology, Tyler said. A real one, not the panicked one from that day. Garrett nodded, letting him continue. I was trying to honor you, Tyler said, to make sure people saw what you'd done for me. But I didn't think about what I was taking from you in the process. I violated your privacy, your choice to remain anonymous, because I was thinking about my gratitude instead of your consent. He paused. I'm sorry. Truly. Garrett looked at this man who'd changed his life completely, who'd meant well but caused chaos, who'd been trying to help but had helped in exactly the wrong way. I forgive you, Garrett said. And actually, I need to thank you. Tyler's eyebrows rose in surprise. If you hadn't recognized me, I never would have had the courage to tell Madison the truth, Garrett explained. I would have kept hiding, kept pretending, until eventually the secret destroyed what we had. He looked at his new wife, radiant in her simple dress. You forced me to face the thing I was most afraid of, and it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Tyler's relief was palpable. Paige squeezed his hand, proud of him for making amends. Also, Harper added, appearing beside them with a plate of appetizers, if you hadn't made everything explode at your wedding, we wouldn't have this hilarious story. So thanks for that. Everyone laughed, the tension breaking. Jester. As the reception wound down, Garrett and Madison found themselves back at their table, watching Harper teach Eleanor how to do some complicated dance move she'd learned on TikTok. We did it, Madison said, leaning against his shoulder. Did what? Built something real. Out of secrets and fear and a lot of mistakes. She turned to look at him. We took all the worst parts, the hiding, the judgment, the money complications, and somehow turned it into this. She gestured at the room, at Harper and Eleanor laughing together, at Jessica and Richard chatting comfortably with Paige and Tyler, at Kelly, the barista, dancing with Frank, the crossword guy, at families that shouldn't work on paper, but did in practice. I love you, Garrett said. Have I mentioned that today? Only about 15 times, Madison said. But I'll never get tired of hearing it. Good, Garrett said, because I plan to say it a lot. For the next 50 or 60 years, minimum. Only 50 or 60? Madison teased. Fine. Forever. Better? Perfect, Madison said, and kissed Jester. Epilogue. 2 years later, the Seattle Historic Building Project was in its final phase. 15 properties transformed from crumbling relics into vibrant mixed-use spaces. Affordable housing on the upper floors, local businesses on the ground level, community spaces in the basements that had once been storage. They'd hired over 100 people from the local community, many of them people who'd been written off by other developers. They'd partnered with trade schools, offering apprenticeships. They'd created something that would outlast them. Garrett stood in what had once been an abandoned warehouse, now a beautiful event space with exposed brick and soaring ceilings. The grand opening was tomorrow. Tonight was just for them. Madison walked through the space, running her hand along the restored woodwork. Thomas would have loved this. I wish I could have met him, Garrett said. Me too, Madison smiled. But I think he'd approve of you, of us, of what we're building. Harper burst through the door, now 16 and taller than Madison. Mom said to tell you congratulations on the project. Also, she's hosting Thanksgiving this year, and you're both required to attend. Jessica's hosting? Garrett was genuinely surprised. Jessica hated hosting. She said, and I quote, "If Eleanor can learn to be less judgmental, I can learn to cook a turkey," Harper reported. Also, can I invite my boyfriend? Madison and Garrett exchanged glances. Boyfriend? They said in unison. Harper rolled her eyes. Yes, Dad, I'm 16. People date. You of all people should understand complicated relationships. Fair point, Garrett admitted. What's his name? Madison asked. Eric. He's in my AP literature class. Very smart. Very respectful. Wants to be a civil rights lawyer. Harper paused. Also, his family has no money, so you can't judge him based on that. Garrett laughed. Wouldn't dream of it. After Harper left to continue exploring, Madison slipped her arm around Garrett's waist. Our daughter is dating. Our daughter, Garrett repeated, testing the words. Harper had started calling Madison my other mom about 6 months ago. Casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Terrifying, right? Madison said. Completely, Garrett agreed, but also kind of wonderful. They stood in the restored warehouse, surrounded by evidence of what they'd built together. Not just buildings, but a life. Not just a marriage, but a family. Not just success, but meaning. You know what I realized? Madison said. What? That day at Oakwood Cafe when we first met, I was looking for escape, a place where I could be nobody. She turned to face him. But what I found was permission to be somebody. The real me, not the performance. And you found the same thing. We saved each other, Garrett said. No, Madison corrected. We chose each other. Despite the fear, despite the complications, despite every reason to walk away, we chose to be seen. Garrett pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. Best decision I ever made. Second best, Madison said. The first was walking into Oakwood Cafe that Tuesday morning. You're right, Garrett agreed. Everything started there, and it did. With black coffee and comfortable silence, and 2 people brave enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real in a world full of pretense.
They'd been right.